recording there. Okay, so welcome to the North Central Climate and Drought Outlook. I got you. There. Sorry about that. I gotta shut that off too. Welcome to the North Central Climate and Drought Outlook for August. Our presenter today is Pete Boulay from the State Climate Office in Minnesota. My name is Doug Cluck. I work for NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and more specifically for the National Centers for Environmental Information. We also have Dennis Toddy from USDA on the phone, and he is going to help answer some of the questions. And that's one thing we do on this at the end is a Q&A session and commentary. If you have any comments, put them all in the question box or question interface, if you will. We'll get to those at the end. We'll try to answer some of them as we go. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Pete to get the show on the road. So thank you, Pete, and go ahead.
Thanks, Doug. Happy to be here. We'll talk a little bit about where we are now and where we've been last month or two and where we're going with the weather and climate. This first slide here is 1 week ago today, I was at the Mississippi headwaters at Lake Itasca, where the Mississippi starts. And one of the big things is to walk across the Mississippi. And yes, it's low up there. Not a lot of volume, though, as you could see in the hydrograph to the left there. It was a little dry, and then thankfully it rained. So it actually, while I was there, it actually came up a bit. So it might take a while for that water to get all the way down south, but it's got to start somewhere. So forward the slide here. So some general information today. This is a collaboration between state climatologists throughout the central region. We're with the AASC. NOAA helps us out, and NCEI, and NIDIS, and Climate Hubs. And of course, the Midwest and High Plains Regional Climate Centers, National Drought Mitigation Center. And to put this on your calendar for the next month, the next Climate Drought Outlook webinar will be on September 21st. Again, a Thursday, 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, and Brian Fuchs will be the presenter. And if you want to see past webinars, you can do that by going to the Midwest Climate Center at Purdue or the High Plains Climate Center as well. And of course, we're open for questions at the end, so if you have anything, let us know. Going over the outline for today, recent conditions, temperature and precipitation ranks mainly based on what's been going on this summer so far. Focusing a little bit more on the 30-day temperature and precipitation. And specifically, our big change was the moisture we started seeing beginning August 1st. It's almost like we turned over to a new climate regime right on August 1st. Going over a little bit of soil moisture as well, and of course, drought. Again, with the drought this year, looking at some impacts, and then of course, outlooks. You probably already heard a lot about El Nino. We'll be back. Some short-term outlooks for the next week or two, and then looking forward into the autumn and a sneak peek at an outlook for the 23-24 winter. Recent conditions, just took this the other day. I always like this soybean field, and of course you have a few rogue corn plants out there too. So other than the corn growing in the soybeans, they look pretty good on campus here in St. Paul. Believe it or not, the St. Paul campus is the one place we do not have really any drought. We've had 8 inches of rain here in the past 30 days. So that's kind of the story. My message today is wide variation of precipitation throughout the entire area. Some places have been getting the storms. Other places have been continually missed. And we're getting an earful from people across the state and the region how they've been missed or getting too much of a good thing. Looking at temperature going back to May, this is May through July temperature ranks. We have very warm start to the summer. May, June, and July, not so much July. July kind of tugged it down a little bit. But looking at May through July, much above average or above average was pretty much common. A few states were near average, like Illinois and Indiana and Kansas. But for generally, it was very heavily weighted for the beginning of the summer. No record wettest or record warmest months were seen, but very, very warm conditions overall. Looking at just July, though, it was kind of a different story. We've heard so much in the media about the heat into the south, and sure enough, there it is. You can see it. Arizona and New Mexico, record warmest, and Florida too, and interestingly enough, Maine. But in the central region, mainly below average temperatures for July. Not to say that we didn't have any hot conditions. There was still plenty of 90s around, and even a few in the hundreds as well. But other than that, the overall temperatures were skewed a little bit cooler, and the kind of the message of a cool drought was what really went on during the month of July. Precipitation, very dry, May through July, especially Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, much below average, a top 10 driest July on record. And of course, around that was also below average as well. But, to the west, especially Wyoming, much above average moisture, and also Nebraska too. Colorado is in there as well. So it was not universally dry May through July, especially as we got towards July, the moisture began to pick up again. And especially just looking at July by itself, it was definitely wetter from basically Wyoming through Nebraska, through Missouri and Illinois. The dryness continued in the north as the drought continued to worsen there. Overall, the main focus of the drought shifted to the north and east throughout the summer. So what's been going on in August so far? It's been wet, fairly wet overall. A few exceptions as you go farther north, northern North Dakota, northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, part of the UP of Michigan, saw less than normal precipitation, but large areas had 200% or more, double normal precipitation, which really helped out the drought situation. And in particular in Missouri, especially southeast Missouri, they got well above and beyond normal precipitation, and also southern Illinois as well. So quite a change from what we've been seeing is the dryness persisting, but now August, a lot more people have been seeing more precip than not. Also, along with that precipitation, it's been cool, especially to the west. I heard from a cattle rancher in Wyoming who was complaining how cold it was, and it's kind of interesting. And the cool and damp conditions in Wyoming has been somewhat of an issue there. But otherwise, the coolness was probably welcome more than not, because it slowed down the drought progress, and where it rained, reversed it and improved conditions. Not universal, a few places were still above normal temperatures, a few warm pockets here and there, but overall, fairly coolish August so far. And of course, if you've been paying attention to the forecast, that's about to change. And I want to point out the coolest area out there in Wyoming, the little pocket. Overall, their summer's been fairly cool. Looking at soil moisture, you really could see a have and have not here. Pretty much a large portion of western part of the U.S., and you can see where the dividing line is, right in Nebraska there, where there's plenty of soil moisture, and then it becomes short once you get in eastern Nebraska. And you can see the large area, Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin was more the focus for soil moisture having a deficit. And this has been developing throughout the summer, and now it's beginning to get more focused as you go farther north. As you can see, northern North Dakota is also now falling short for soil moisture. It's there are areas like in southwest Minnesota, one place to point out, it's been about average for the last month or two. So there's also about average soil moisture, and well above normal soil moisture too, in like southeast Missouri, where they're getting plenty of rain. Looking at topsoil moisture, short, very short. Very dry conditions, and just basically in Minnesota and Montana, everybody else is either dry or somewhat average for this time of year. So not too bad. In many states, actually has been improving throughout the summer, especially in August with the return of the precipitation. Corn conditions have been basically improving a little bit in the past week. Good to excellent has gone up a tick here and there. they were on the downside for a while there as the drought continued to worsen. But you know, I like to see the pluses on those states. They're not everybody is improved the good to excellent conditions. A few places fell off a point or two, but not too bad. Not too bad. Lots of greens. And interestingly, the corn progress is some of it's quite advanced. Like in Minnesota, it's 20% ahead of where it is, you know, for this time, the 5-year average. So it's ahead of phenology, and around in Minnesota here, our gardens are reflecting that too. Everything's ahead, like tomatoes and just vegetables or anything else is ahead of things, and that's because it's been so warm. But you can see there's a wide variation from state to state. Also, soybean conditions good to excellent. Lots of greens again. That's a good sign. We were seeing some improvement there. You know, the rains were timely, and some fell just in the nick of time. Not universal, of course, but definitely better than we were looking a few weeks ago. So drought monitor, looking at the past 2 months, you know, Minnesota, Wisconsin had a flash drought over the last 2 months, but heavy rains in August had improvements in almost all the rest of the states. You know, one thing to point out is in Southwest Wisconsin was one of the places that degraded the most, and also I'll point this out further. Wisconsin had its first D4 drought which is exceptional drought for the first time since the drought monitor was created. So it's about 23 years or so. So, but you can also see lots of improvement from June to August where the heavy rains fell. So we have kind of an erosion of drought, and we have a little bit less coverage now. And especially note Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky. They were covered by drought of some level back in June. Now drought's hard to find there. Looking at the class change, more improvement than degradation out there. The degradation has been mainly focused in the northern tier states and a little bit in eastern Kansas and southwest of Missouri. But other than that, there's been improvements, especially as you go farther east. Pretty much everybody from Illinois on eastward has seen some improvement, and also especially in Kansas, where they had very wet conditions in southwest Kansas as well. Nebraska is another state that's kind of in between, dry in the east a bit, but wetter in the west. And other places like, you know, southwest Colorado has worsened a bit too. Looking at rivers and streams, you know, it's been a positive thing for some reservoirs. This is Blue Mesa, Colorado's largest reservoir, and they've had full recovery from the long drought they were in. So it looks rather pretty there. So it's nice to see some of these reservoirs getting full again. Looking at stream flow, this is the map of the 28-day average stream flow compared to historical stream flow for August 16th. And a lot of green, a lot of normal conditions now. And that's good to see. And actually, there's some areas that are much above normal high conditions right there in southern Illinois and southeast Missouri. And the driest conditions right now are basically in Minnesota, especially northeast Minnesota, and also northwest Wisconsin, where the drought has been worsening. And also in Iowa, there's still some below normal to much below normal stream flows as well. But in general, an improved situation of what we've seen a few weeks ago. Looking at the Missouri River Basin, this is the weekly update from the 16th on Wednesday. And I'll have you focus on the chart in the upper right there. So it's where we're sitting at right now is basically on the low end of average. And compared to last year was much, much lower than now. So we're in better shape with the Missouri River Basin than we were a year ago. And you can see the forecast is just kind of hugging that low end of normal, or low end of average, I'll say, from 1969 through 2022. So, you know, there's some water in the system, and that's a good thing. Looking at the Mississippi River, some also good news. Basically, most of the Mississippi is in the normal range. except upstream from the Twin Cities, where there's been some below normal readings, and it was looking a little dire. But like many places, the upper Mississippi has seen some precipitation, and a lot more precipitation in the southern part in Missouri as well. So once you get away from the main stem, smaller streams vary quite a bit. There are still some in much below normal levels here and there in Minnesota, especially in Iowa and Minnesota, but a wide range depending on where the thunderstorms hit. And it's looking better, and there's not really any restrictions on the Mississippi in this sector right now. Looking at the Great Lakes, here's another graph. There's a lot there to look at, but what I would focus on is basically the change for where we were 2 years ago. So right now we are very close to average water levels in Lakes Michigan or Huron, but it has fallen quite a bit from the high water we saw in 2021. So we've fallen about 2 feet, but it's still about average. So luckily it because of the drought, it has fallen, but it could have fallen a lot further if we had started out at average. But since we started such a high level, we had some space to give way when the drought hit. Looking at some state impacts, nice pretty picture in Iowa with the storms that I went through with that cold front last night. We had a cold front move through the upper Midwest. It was moving through Chicago this morning, is now moving into Michigan, and a line of thunderstorms along with that. Behind that front, of course, cooler air, and the smoke is returned from Canada as well. Looking out to the west, Colorado was very warm. July in western Colorado near normal east, but parts of central Colorado had driest July in 129 years, and really there was a lack of a summer monsoon, and that was affecting many areas, even here in Minnesota. We get kind of a little extra kick in the atmosphere with that late summer monsoon moisture that comes up, and that's one factor that's been missing in a few states, including Colorado. There's been some severe weather, a strong tornado did a loop-de-loop southwest of Yuma, and possible state record hailstone on August 8th. There was a little bit of melting before they could get it to the official weather service place to measure it. So we'll have to see if they declare that a record or not. Nebraska, half the state still in drought, but a big improvement since mid-May when half the state was in D3 or D4. The cool, dry temperatures that helped. There is some hydro issues, groundwater problems in the eastern half of the state. There's still some farm ponds dry, and some corn in some areas were burnt up a bit. So kind of a wide range of conditions there. In Kansas, the southwest part of the state had a top 10 wettest July on record. It went from 35% D4, that's exceptional drought, to only 1.3%, just around 1% by August 15th. And some places in the state don't have any drought at all. And top 10 wettest July, you can see on that image there for Kansas, or the ranking of precipitation to period of record. So very wet in southwest Kansas. Looking at South and North Dakota, southwest part of the state, wetter than normal, and there is unfortunately an anthrax outbreak going on there right now because it's just the right conditions there for that. The north half of the state is in worsening drought, especially along the Canadian border. South Dakota has seen general improvement, still dry with some drought, moderate to severe drought in the eastern part of the state. Minnesota, Wisconsin, what worsening drought conditions in both states until this past week, where we had a large rain event to give 1 to 2 inches of rain over a day or two. In some places 3 to 4 inches of rain, swath across central Minnesota and into Wisconsin. And like a lot of places, there's a large variability in crop and pasture conditions. Of course, there's a big difference between irrigated and not irrigated lands. In August, like many states, been wet in south half of Minnesota, but there was a large hail event that came across the state last Friday that caused a lot of damage to property, roofs in the Twin Cities, and also some crop damage too. And then the drought is becoming more acute in Wisconsin. They had the first D4 way up there in the northwest part of the state. First D4 in 23 years. So not out of the woods yet for Wisconsin. Looking at Iowa and Missouri, cool drought in Iowa. Crops are looking good in the state, trending drier in northeast part of Iowa. And you can see that on the precipitation percent of mean. There's kind of a little dry area that's between 50 and 75% of the mean for August so far. It went from dry to very wet in Missouri, especially southeast Missouri, where Mississippi County in the far corner there saw a foot of rain. So plenty of moisture there. Soil moisture is up overall in Missouri. Streams and creeks are up and pastures are greening up. However, there's still some long-term deficits still present in the state. In Illinois, also similar improvements in soil, stream, and crop conditions, especially central and southern Illinois. Something good that we like to see as we start going into fall is recharge to use water to be stored in the bank to be withdrawn next year. Deeper soils are starting to see improvement. You can see on that chart there in Champaign, Illinois, going down to 20 inches. You can see the moisture level there starting to creep back up to the median, and that's good to see. Still pockets of dryness though, especially in northwest Illinois. Indiana, receding from drought. Now there is some sun death syndrome on early planted soybeans in the south, and I think that was kind of expected due to the conditions. Otherwise, crops are progressing, and it sounds like some good conditions and some specialty crops like pumpkins and watermelon look really good right now in Indiana. Kentucky and Ohio, possible state record of 11 inches, 11.22 inches of rain in 24 hours at the Graves County Mesonet. I'm going to look into that and see if that is now going to be the new state record. It has been a very active severe weather situation in Ohio, along with the rains coming back. And I looked into a little bit about the algae situation on Western Erie. It's present and something they're keeping an eye on. And then if you read the website on guidance for algae, stay away from the scum in Lake Erie. So that's probably always good advice. Some pictures of the flooding on I-69 near Mayfield, and then that's a Mesonet picture in the far western part of Kentucky is where they got the heaviest rain. So let's look at the climate outlooks. Let's look at what's going to happen over the next week and then the next 8 to 14 days, and then looking forward to September and a peek at the fall. So here's the 7-day precipitation forecast, and I was wondering if anybody here could pick out where the ridge might be in the country. Yes, it's where there's no precipitation. It's a giant ridge. Means heat and dry for a lot of places in the central region. However, on the edges of the ridge, there is going to be some storms and rains. So especially places like Michigan have the best chance of seeing some precipitation, although some of that is from the cold front that's coming through today. So that might be some of the precip they expect with that front going through more so than later. And something else I want to point out is this here in California. What is that? That is the moisture from Hurricane Hillary that's forecast to move into the Baja and into Southern California. And it'll be interesting to see where that moisture winds up propagating after that. It does show up on other outlooks, and I will show you that in a minute here. And the 6 to 10 day, you can see the impact of Hillary out there for the 6 to 10 day temperature precipitation outlook, below normal temperatures to western part of the country, while we're going to be baking in above normal temperatures. Will this be the last big heat wave of the summer? I guess we'll have to wait and see there. And below normal precipitation across much of the Great Lakes and central region. But you can see some above normal precipitation possible Wyoming, Colorado, and you kind of see where the core of the precipitation is
Hey,
supposed to. Yes, yes,
yeah,
Dennis.
can we
Yeah,
make,
Doug.
yeah, just want to make sure people understand these are probabilities and not absolute forecasts. So do you want to make sure?
Absolutely.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and describe that? Thanks.
Yes. Yeah. Now, if you look in the fine print, as in any document, there's a probability percent chance. So this is not a guarantee that you will have above normal, below normal, or normal. It's going to be some kind of range. And the darker the colors, the more sure of the chances of getting that that precipitation or temperature. So you see the center of that above. It's likely going to be above and very highly likely to be above there. So once you get farther away from the core of those colors, the chances get a little less. So then you start getting leaning above for with the lighter colors there too. But thank you, Doug, for pointing that out. Yes, this is not an absolute forecast. I would still go to weather.gov and keep track of your local area, what your National Weather Service office is saying for the future. And looking a little bit more farther ahead, this is looking for the next week after that. For basically the rest of August is kind of the outlook is showing that ridge is probably going to shift a little bit to the east, and along with it, the above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation, with a little bit more of above normal precipitation probability coming a little bit more into our area. So this is the risk of hazardous temperatures with our heat wave coming. This is from basically coming up next week, and this is looking at heat index values, and they value a bit, they change a bit. For the northern tier, it's 100 degrees. Southern tier is 105, and there's a slight probability of excessive heat coming in for some of our states, and maybe a moderate there too. The core of the highest heat will be in the far south, away from areas.
Sorry, Pete.
Yeah.
Where is the northern tier and southern tier? Can you tell us?
That's a good. I was hoping somebody wouldn't ask that, but I always think of the northern tier as like the two states, and then southern tier. That's a good question. I think I better have to look that up. That's I pulled that right off their guides, and I just realized, like, wait a minute, what? I kind of have in my mind, I know what the Southwest should be, right?
Yeah.
So it might be linked into how local offices treat their heat index.
Okay.
That they have warnings and advisories. But good question.
I think the big point here is that continuing extreme heat to our south, mostly.
Okay.
But some of that is going to edge up into, southern Kansas, Missouri, almost all of Kentucky, and not really that cool just north of there either. So as you were saying, sorry, I don't want to.
No, hey, that's good. That's good. Yeah. So going ahead into September, these just came out today, and we have a tendency for above normal temperatures again for kind of the western part of our area, and then equal chances, which that means basically a three-sided coin. We have a 33% of below normal or above normal temperatures, and that's the same with the precipitation too. Equal chances means a three-sided coin, but a below tendency in the Great Lakes area. Looking farther out in the autumn, September through November, equal chances for most of the central region, and below normal precipitation again in the Great Lakes, with most of the rest of the areas having equal chances again. And the seasonal drought outlook, the tendency is basically our drought is supposed to persist where it is now. This is a long range. It goes all the way to November 30. So be interesting to see. I think really, if you look at the outlooks for the next couple of weeks and going into September, it's a pretty high likelihood that drought is probably going to persist over many areas, especially with this heat coming in and the lack of moisture over the next 7 days. You know, we really have been fortunate to get the precipitation we did to store a little bit of water, and that's going to help us. It could have been much worse had we been a really hot summer and drier in August so far. We're right now under an El Nino advisory. This is about as big as a probability as you can get on these charts. Chances El Nino persisting through this winter is greater than 95%, and there's even a 56% chance of a strong El Nino this winter, and a strong El Nino is 1.5 degrees C. The winter of 2016 was the last time we had a strong El Nino, so pretty likely under the influence of an El Nino for quite a few months, it looks like, even into next year. So outlook summary, heat is returning, scant precipitation for most of us, other than on the edges of the ridge. Equal chances to a tilt above normal temperatures through the autumn, and below normal precipitation in the Great Lakes region, at least a tendency for that. And, you know, our drought issues are likely to continue, but not universal. So some places that have gotten plenty of rain are now lifted out of drought, and they'll probably stay out of drought for a while, about some time with that precipitation, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. This is a list for further information if you want to look up past presentations, and including this one. Look at all the climate reports that come out. Climate Prediction Center is where most of my outlooks come from, and we heavily rely on those, so we wait for those to come out. You know, on this Thursday, the third Thursday of the month, U.S. Drought Portal and National Drought Mitigation Center and regional climate centers as well. And have to end with Paul and Babe at Bemidji, Minnesota. I know many states claim Paul Bunyan and Babe, but you know, I always think Minnesota is probably really their home, I would think. But I'm surprised how many states I go to also claim Paul and Babe as their kind of the icons as well. So yeah, thank you. Any questions anybody might have?
Yeah, we'll get to that in just a minute.
Okay.
Can you back up a little bit to the, let's say 2-week outlook?
Which one? 2-week outlook.
Yeah, that one, 8 to 14 day. So couple things I wanted to say real quick, and Dennis, feel free to chime in here anytime you want. One thing is that there are some areas that are under drought that are sort of having trouble already. They didn't get all the rain that they'd hoped. These next week or two of these high temperatures and relatively dry conditions are going to lead to increasing drought. No two ways about it. We'll be in a deficit, obviously. We'll be tapping some of that lower ground soil moisture and such. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that the Mississippi River, although relatively okay right now in terms of flow and barge traffic, there are some restrictions here and there, but they're relatively minor. We haven't hit the low season in terms of low water. So not that I'm an expert on this, but I understand that that starts coming more into play in September and October, and we'll report on that in September and October as it happens. But with these, again, dry conditions across almost the entire region, and it's the Ohio and upper Mississippi that I won't say matter the most, but they matter a lot when this happens. There's still concern that we're going to see some issues with the Mississippi and barge traffic or transportation up and down it come this fall. Dennis, do you want to say anything specifically about agriculture in the Midwest in terms of the next week or so, or 2 weeks, I should say, and conditions? And you want to blow any whistles or anything?
Certainly, what you said about increasing drought conditions are going to come into play. We've kind of skated by this year on a lot of our crops with getting, enough moisture that they've been doing okay. Some places a little bit worse. We are getting close to the end of the season. Say for corn, for example, we're past the point of doing, we've kind of locked in most of what our yield is going to be. The increasing drought won't help, but it won't hurt, it won't hurt a terrible amount. From soybeans, soybeans still have an ability to make if conditions are good, this will kind of ding their yield potential. Probably the thing we're should be most aware of is a human and animal health issue with the extreme heat. We've not had a lot of extreme heat this summer. When we had the last extreme heat in late July, we had some livestock losses, and those could happen again. And because we haven't had that much heat, we could have some human health issues also.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Dennis. Okay. And then go back two slides, please. I just want to say, you said, well, we see this massive ridge. What a ridge is? Do you want to explain a ridge and downward motion real quick, and why it doesn't rain in that big white spot?
Well, a large area, high pressure, enormous, and air sinks in high. It doesn't lead to much cloud development at all. But also important to in a summer is the clockwise rotation around a high pressure center. So think of a giant clock in the middle of the country there. So what we like to look forward to is what we call ridge riders, and those are the big storms that ride up along the edge of a giant ridge such as this, and there always will be those coming. And what's intriguing is there's moisture to be had with these now with the Hillary moisture. So I'm keen on seeing. We didn't have much of a monsoon season this year, and we'll see what happens with this. And I don't know yet. It's too far out to tell. No, that's the problem. You don't know exactly where the storms are going to be with something like that. So, but yeah, large area, high pressure, over the country, and not much moisture. So yeah, it will make the drought worse, like you and Dennis was saying. Absolutely, it's not good for the drought.
No. So one of the questions we had was a weak or non-existent monsoon and what the reasoning is for this. And there's a lot of reasons for it. Sorry. One of them is, one of the hypotheses is that when you get a relatively wet conditions in the previous winter and spring, conditions are pretty wet, you don't build as you don't build as strong of a high heat pressure. And I know that sounds the opposite of what Pete just told you. The other, and so thus you don't pull up the moisture as easily or as readily as you would during a normal dry southwest season. The other reason is when we have wet conditions in the plains, let's say central to southern plains, which we did, especially in the high plains, basically Oklahoma to Montana, we often see sort of the opposite happen in the monsoon region. So when the plains are wet, the Four Corners or desert Southwest tends to be dry, and vice versa. And so strong monsoons, when you see a strong monsoon year with lots of rain in the Southwest in the summer, you tend to see dryness in the plains. It's a rule of thumb rather than a law, but it does happen that way. Anything either one of you want to say about that? Because that was a question that we got asked. Okay. Okay. Now the other questions. Okay, I guess I will say this one is for Pete, but Dennis and Pete can probably talk about this. Any idea why Minneapolis had more than 20 days of temperatures above 90, where Des Moines just south, 3 hours south or whatever it is, barely above a dozen? Is there a good reason for this year?
Let's see. Probably to show that. Let's see. Trying to see which slide will help out the most there. Hang on. Where's the drought? Yeah. So drought. If you're dry, you get better chance of getting those hot days.
Yeah.
And we just were drier in the Twin Cities, worsening drought than Des Moines. you know, that's part of it. Moisture in the air will suppress the air temperature because the sun is heating up the ground. The ground's bone dry, which we had in the Twin Cities up until basically a week ago. Helps out heat the ground a bit too. Also, a little bit of heat island would help out as well, and that is also a factor in Twin Cities too. We have the heat island.
We do have heat island on both of those. Des Moines has a heat island too.
Well, yeah, but no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, well, the real issue was the storm track was to the south and to the south of Minneapolis, and so Des Moines had more cloudy days, perhaps a little more rain, and that's the big reason. That's probably the easiest answer, right?
Yep, that's part of it.
I think there's one more piece too. You know, you mentioned already where the high pressure set up. Early in the summer, the center of the high pressure was actually up over Minnesota, southern Canada. And under the center of high pressure, you also get more of that sinking motion, which helps heat temperatures a bit more. I think that had another part to play along with the other things we've mentioned already.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe an early question, but does El Nino in the winter mean we may not have a snow drought for 23-24? Oh boy, that's a great question. Pete, you're the snow expert. Why don't you tell us the answer to that?
You know, it historically speaking, always temperature has a better handle on El Nino than precipitation. It only takes one big storm to really skew those kind of statistics, and it's hard to say. It's not typically a snowy winter for El Ninos. We have better shot in a La Nina pattern, but then again, that's never a slam dunk either, as we've seen in the past 3 years. I wouldn't say a snow drought at this point. It's too hard to tell. There's too much variability in snow. It depends on the storm track.
But there's also location. They don't say location for where they are.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a big state, even Minnesota. So.
Yeah, I'm going to.
Where was it?
I'm going to assume it's Wisconsin, Minnesota, or Michigan, one of those areas, as opposed to a mountain area. So
I would be more worried about the ability to keep the snow on the ground in an El Nino than how much snow falls.
Yeah. So
if you're looking for snow to play in.
So generally speaking, extremely generally, it does call El Nino, especially a strong El Nino, calls for warmer than normal temperatures for the upper tier or two of states across our area, north central part of the U.S., and relatively drier conditions. Now, you can have pretty dry conditions and have a lot of snow, by the way. It really depends on when it happens and how it happens and all that kind of stuff. So it's really tough to call a snow drought based on El Nino or La Nina. I guess that's what you already said. Okay, moving on. When did we last have a strong El Nino? And I'm going to have to think about that and hope Dennis or Pete know the answer.
15-16 was last time we had something of the magnitude we could have, and it was a very strong El Nino.
Right, and we can mention the strength. The predicted strength of El Nino this year is like a 90% chance it will be at least moderate, which means 1 degree Celsius above normal along the equator. That's how we measure strength, by the way. Yes. It's temperature of the ocean waters. It's not necessarily how hard it hits North America. It's simply based on the temperature in the ocean. But that temperature in the ocean means a lot in terms of energy, and the energy sort of that can make it to North America if it's tapped, so to speak. So if we warm from 1 to 1.5 degrees, that's a big jump because it's such a huge area that we're warming. All right. That just means more energy in the system, more chances for interesting weather, I guess you could say, in North America. How it comes out, though, is really the $64 billion question. So that's the last strong El Nino. And let's see, should we be wetter, especially in the outlook with El Nino? Okay, so you're not going to see great El Nino, what we call signatures, until we get into sort of October, November, December, and later. November, December, January. Yeah, January and December, January, February. Those are sort of the strongest signatures we often see. The best correlations with El Nino happen then across North America. Usually warmer and drier than normal to the north, wetter and cooler than normal to the south. Doesn't mean they're going to be colder in Texas than they are in Minnesota. It just means compared to normal, those places will be seeing those two signatures.
Okay. At least here in Minnesota, the 15-16, it was warm and very warm. December is 10 degrees above normal in the Twin Cities. Okay. It did snow. It's not like we didn't have any snow, but it wasn't like specifically like really snowy or anything like that.
Right. Conditions, Minnesota, upper Midwest, drought last fall, then snow, record snow. Yeah, so we're talking about crazy swings from super dry to super wet. And is there any climate connection with these wild swings? And the obvious answer is absolutely. There's climate connections all over the place. Whether they're because of climate change is again something that isn't easily answered and quickly answered. There are, I don't know if Dennis wants to talk about some of the work that our past presenter, Trent Ford, has done in terms of climate extremes and rapid transitions. But there is a tendency towards rapid transitions more and more. Dennis, do you have anything you want to expand on that?
Yeah, it's a like Doug said, it's a complicated question because you're looking at swing. What are the time scale of swings? Are you talking day to day, week to week, month to month, season to season? And then you've got space, parts of a state over a whole region, whatever. So Trent Ford from Illinois published a paper looking over the Midwest, looking at, I think, like 30 to 90 day swings. And basically what he was showing was, yes, there are becoming more frequent big swings from wet to dry and dry to wet that are happening within the growing season.
Yep. And then someone asked about, or someone clarified, they're talking about Cedar Rapids and snow. And Dennis went on to say that it's really tough precipitation, especially in Iowa and actually Missouri for that matter, and other parts, sort of the middle of the country, don't have a hard and fast signature with El Nino as much as we'd like them to. It really depends on where that jet stream sets up over the winter. If it's a little bit further north, a little bit further south, it makes an immense difference. And then,
and Doug, I think it's good to remember too that there's the El Nino, La Nina are not the same year round,
right?
And it depends on where you are in the country. It depends what season you're in. Can be quite different as to what we see with this,
right?
And the strength of that signal.
It's a good point. August, September, and October, there's a let's say a leaning towards wetter and cooler conditions. Let's say, and we've seen some of this from Wyoming, Colorado, Northeast Colorado, straight east into the Midwest, if you will, in terms of wetter and cooler conditions. Has that played out this year? Will it play out this year? Well, when you average everything out, I'm not sure it will. Yes, early August was pretty wet in that area. Late August is going to be the opposite. So we may balance it and it may not show up, right? That's the issue with looking at things at different scales like that. Across months and seasons, things sort of average out over time. And then Craig, yeah, thanks Craig for that comment. We do recognize that this year is anomalous from a climate change point of view, whereas many of the oceans, many of the surface waters of the oceans are much warmer than we have ever seen. That's troubling, and it's also we're thinking it's a little more difficult to pick out the signals that we normally kind of rely on as much as we can in terms of figuring out what's going to be happening seasonally, sort of longer term especially. So, and he calls it a wild card, and I'd say that, yes, a wild card and an added chaos to our already chaotic system. So I guess buckle your seatbelts. Now, we'll see what's going to happen. September, we'll have another one of these calls. And well, hopefully we'll be a little more refined on, we'll talk more about El Nino, of course, and what we can expect coming this winter. And on that note, I think we are done, except if Dennis or Pete have any final words of wisdom. And if not, why don't you go back to our contact information at the very end, please, Pete?
All right, getting there.
Yeah.
Oop,
The reason I say that is if anybody, if anybody has any questions, there's Dennis, Doug, and Pete, the top three guys there. If you have any questions, let us know. We'll do our best to answer them, or find the person.
We'll send them all to Doug. We'll send them all to Doug to be answered.
I like your thinking.
Yeah. Thank you all very much. Thank you all very much. We'll be back on September 21st, so kind of late in the month. Brian Fuchs from the National Drought Mitigation Center will be our presenter. He is also a regional climatologist as well. So thank you all for hanging in there. Appreciate you. Have a good month. And thanks, Dennis and Pete, a lot.
No problem.
Thank you.